Hello and welcome to my channel. It's Hila here, Saturday Night Stitch, and thank you so much for tuning in. Today we're going to be making this off-shoulder top from Burda 6 2023, which is a top that I very much liked once I saw the line drawing. However, top number 110 has got an elasticated waist, which I'm just not going to be doing, so I'm going to be making the longer length. If you haven't sewn with Burda patterns before, you have to go onto the sizing page so that you can see which size to trace out. And in order to trace out, you need to go check out the pattern overview, which shows you where you're going to find your pattern, also the fabric requirements and the notions that you are going to require. There's also a quick start instruction there for pros, but pretty much it gives you everything that you need. So in order to trace the pattern, you're going to need a quilting ruler. I love this quilting ruler that I've had for nearly 8 years. It works really well. A pencil, scissors, and I also use baking parchment paper to trace my patterns out, but you're welcome to use even different types of tracing paper. And you need some pattern weights, and I'm just using some paper weights on there to hold things down. First thing you're going to do is you're going to remove the pattern sheets, which are located in the middle of the magazine, particularly if you're using the English issue. It's a bit different with the German issue. The patterns are at the back, but it is a similar process. You have to sort of unstaple them. Then you're going to open them up. This might seem a little bit overwhelming, but trust me, it does get easier. Your first time is probably going to be the most challenging bit. After that, honestly, you just go down that learning curve. So just to give you an idea of how big the pattern sheets are, I just have it unfolded on my kitchen island there. I think the size is called A1, I think, but they are quite big, but you have to use your scissors in order to cut them down the middle like that, and then that makes for a smaller, more manageable pattern piece. Now all those squiggly lines that you are seeing on there, right, those are the different pattern sizes. So if you've ever looked at the Burda cover and they tell you 173 patterns for the price of £8, is literally because they're classing each size as a different pattern. So for my top here, I'm doing the black pattern line on sheet B, and I've decided that I'm going to trace out a size 40. I normally do a size 38, but I just wanted it to be a little bit baggier. So in order to locate your pattern, you sort of do what's similar to map reading. There's a bit of a grid system going on. So you go down and up along to see where the number is. So for me, I was looking for number 1, which was in black, and then you find it and then you sort of try and locate where the pattern piece is before you begin to trace it. So you're going to grab whatever tracing medium you've decided to use. Another thing that other people can do is to use erasable highlighters, which can help for you to see what it is you're doing. So I'm going to start off by tracing the front pattern piece, and I always refer back to the magazine just so that I've made sure that I've got all of the markings that I need for that. So I tend to mess about with the location so that I can make sure I'm making the best out of it and being as efficient as possible. I don't like to waste resources, so I always try to make sure that I line up any pattern pieces that are on the fold, that is to say that have a straight edge. I will line them up with the edge of the baking parchment. So as you can see there, you can always tell that it's a fold line when they give it a broken line on the line drawings in the magazine. So I'll line it up, and that means that I'm not going to waste any of the baking parchment, and I always put that fold line mechanism on there where you just do the double arrows just so that I can tell straight away. And then I just go into it making sure that I'm tracing out using my pencil. It doesn't take as long as one might think it does. Once you get into it, it can become quite a lovely meditative thing to do, because you do sort of have to engage your brain to the exclusion of everything else, and I think that's a nice thing to do. So as I said there, I am making version 110 but I'm making it longer, so I'm not doing the elasticated waist because I just don't think that works for the look that I'm going to. Now, top tip, you need to make sure that you put in all of those markings on there, because it does help you when you actually get to sewing the pattern itself, so that you know which seam to attach to, particularly on the ones that are a bit more complex. I always make sure to put in all of the key details so that later on when I'm sorting out my sewing room and I come across a pattern, I have to know what it is. So I always put the Burda issue, the pattern number, the name of the pattern, so in this case it's the front bodice, how many needs to be cut. I always put the size on. And another thing that I do is if there's any elasticated casing or any zipper knots, I will put those on there. And then because I sew without, I don't put seam allowances on when I trace. I always make sure to say no seam allowances, because on past patterns I used to add seam allowances, so it's important for me to be able to distinguish. So a key thing is you're going to need to make sure that you note how wide the elasticated casing is, and it's 1/2 inch, so you always want to add that. And that's where the quilting ruler comes in so handy, because it does have those demarcations which make it easier to add them on. And remembering to add in the grain lines as well, those are very important, and adding in those notches. So Burda will only ever notch the front of the sleeve and the front of the body, so you don't have to worry about having double notches. You just have one notch, and that notch denotes where the front of the pattern is, which I find to be very useful. Another thing that I do for future storage is I will do my own artistic impression of the line drawing, so that I know what it is just at a glance without having to look at it. And I always find this the funnest bit. And that's my artistic impression of top number 113. And so we're going to cut everything out. So this top is so simple and so easy to make, because I'm recording this after I've actually made it. So it's only got the 3 pattern pieces, the back and the front and the sleeve. And the back is actually a little bit higher. So it's similar but different in the sense that it's got a higher back than the front, and the front is lower, obviously, to create that really lovely square neckline that you get. So once you have your pattern pieces ready, it's time to go and do some sewing. I always get excited when I get to this point, because it means that I'm getting closer. The fabric that I'm using is a gingham seersucker, so it does have texture. It's also bold because of the contrast between the red and the white, and I love it. Initially I was going to use it to make a dress, but then I thought that it actually works really well for this top. So I add my seam allowances when I'm actually doing the cutting, and it does sound tricky, but honestly, once you get into it, right, you just train your eye, and your eye gets better. The first few times they might be a little bit off, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And I do think that it is worth it, because one of the main benefits is that it's easy to make alterations. And whenever you're cutting anything on the fold, personally, I would say that always make sure you notch your fold, your center front or your center back. It's always very useful. For the hem, so for my seam allowances, I'll use a 1/2 inch, seam allowance, and then for the hem, I will maybe go for 3/4 of an inch or 5/8 of an inch, and that's just me cutting it out there, adding the seam allowances as I am cutting. So we come to that notch again, making sure that you notch it, because remember with Burda they only notch the front bodice piece. When it comes to the sleeves, we want to make sure that we're notching where the elastic is supposed to begin. Load up your bobbins, because all the preparation is ready and we're about to sew. And we're nearly there, we're close. I always get excited when I get to the point where I can sew. So this one is a very simple and straightforward pattern to do. I would rate this as a beginner friendly pattern. And as you can see there, you can see that the front is lower than the back. I suppose technically speaking, if you wanted to have the same back and neck, you could just use the front bodice pattern piece and cut that out twice, and actually just use 2 pattern pieces of the front bodice and the sleeve. So once you've sewn your side seams there, we're going to make the casings for the front and the back, because remember the neckline is made up by gathering the elastic, and that's just simply straightforward, folding it under and then folding it under again. So I like to use wonder clips as opposed to pins whenever I have to do anything like that, and because the seersucker is quite poofy, I'm actually using pins. Otherwise normally I would press it down, but because it's seersucker, I'm not actually pressing it down, because I wouldn't be ironing this seersucker anyway, because that is how it comes out of the dryer. So whilst I'm at it, I'm also going to finish the hem as well, because my fabric is it unravels quite a fair bit. So at first I thought it was a cotton, 100% cotton, but I think it's actually more of a 70% cotton, because it was unraveling. So I was trying to make sure that I overlock it as I went along in order to reduce any issues. So the front and the back, they've got different size elastic lengths, so you just need to make sure that you choose the right one. And before you go ahead and cut it out, you want to check that the length suits your chest, your bodice itself. So for me personally, I found that it was just a little bit too long for me, and I had to take out an inch, because I wanted to be able to wear my bra without the bra strap showing. So that length will determine how far across your chest it goes. So it's just a quick way of checking it. Now I have a very quick way of inserting elastics on a straight, where you've got a straight elastic casing and it's not cylindrical, and I use my loop turner. And this is the fastest way to actually get your elastic in. There's no fiddling around with threading through a bodkin or a safety pin. I just make sure to hook my elastic in as if you're fishing. If you've ever been fishing and you have to hook a worm, it's a very similar concept. And you just pull it through. I use the wonder clips at the end to ensure that I don't accidentally pull the elastic through. I've done that before, but even if you do that, this process is so quick anyway that you could make that same mistake 3 or 4 times and it's still faster than trying to use a safety pin. And voila, it's already in there. And then you have to baste it down so that obviously it doesn't come off. So you can use hand sewing or you can use a sewing machine. And once you've done both sides, we'll then be ready to move to the sleeve. So as you can see there, the construction is very simple and straightforward. You're basically inserting the elastic first on the front and the back, and then you're going to move on to the sleeves. So with the sleeves, again, simple and straightforward. We're going to do the underarm seam and finish that off with an overlocker. And I was so happy I actually finished the thread. I feel like that's always something to celebrate in my sewing room. When I finish a full thread, I always feel very efficient with it. With the sleeve, whilst we do the side seam, the underarm seam, also going to finish that hem. So I always find that it's a lot better and a lot quicker to do as much as I can when I'm on a particular machine. So if I'm sewing, try and do as much of the sewing as I can. If I'm using the overlocker, try and do as much of the overlocking as I can. So we come back to the bodice now, and we're just going to lay it out in a way that's going to make it easy to attach the sleeve seam. So you're going to find that notch so that you know where your front is, and you're going to find the sleeve notch, and you're going to line up the notches and the underarm seams and sew from where the bodice elastic begins to where the bodice the back bodice elastic begins to where the front bodice elastic begins, because the sleeve cap in itself is done differently. So that's quite an important point to make there, that you're just going to sew up basically the underarm sleeve, and then the sleeve cap is going to remain open. And it may sound a little bit confusing, but it will make sense. So sometimes with these things, it's better to go through the whole instructions first before you start, because then some things don't make sense until they do make sense. But the key thing there, make sure that your underarm sleeves are aligned up. So again, I prefer using wonder clips. If you haven't used wonder clips, I highly recommend using them. And you'll find that, remember, we notched where the elastic casing on the sleeve cap is supposed to go. that matches up with where the elasticated part of the bodices go. So once you've sewn that up and you finish it off with an overlocker, so I neatened it using the overlocker, you end up with that. So as you can see, it's like half the sleeve cap hasn't been sewn up. And when you finish it with the overlocker, you're going to finish the whole sleeve cap, but without cutting off any bits of that upper sleeve, if that makes sense. So as you can see here on the overlock, I tried to do a close-up. I do apologize for the fuzziness, but I was trying to. So I can cut off bits at the where I've got the two seams together. But once I get to the section where I'm going to have to make an elasticated casing, I'm not cutting off any seams. I'm trying to make sure that the overlocker is just finishing the edge of that. And I'm doing this on my fabric because my fabric was fraying. But if you're using a fabric like, say, a Tanalon or a Batiste or a Coton Voile, you probably won't need to do this step. So the next step is probably, I guess, the most complicated of this particular project. But yeah, I would say that it is, but it's actually quite simple in the grand scheme of things. But you just have to create the elastic casing along the sleeve cap, which is curved. And so again, using the wonderful power of Wonder Clips, I'm using the overlocked edge to be the first fold, and then I do the rest of the fold over that, and I'm using the Wonder Clips to keep it down. And I guess, yeah, because this is the most complex bit of it, that's why I would say that this is a beginner-friendly pattern, because it doesn't get any more complex than this. And you're going to leave, when you sew down that hem, you're going to leave the edges open so that you can thread the elastic through. So these ones, they've got the elasticated lengths that you have to cut out and make sure that you choose the right one. So with this, because it's not in the round, it's not cylindrical, so to speak, I can still use the loop turner tool that I have. And this loop turner, it is so useful for so many things that are off prescription, as in outside of what it's actually meant to be used for. And I just very slowly pull it through. And again, use a Wonder Clip to make sure that you don't lose that elastic end and have to start again. But even if you do, it doesn't take as long as having to use a bodkin or a safety pin, which I think is a win-win in my book. So you're going to make sure that we get that elastic right at the edge where we want it to meet the elastic from the bodice. So we just sort of like tuck it in there neatly. And because of the precision required on this one, I used hand sewing, because hand sewing is absolutely incredible for covering a multitude of sins. And in this particular case, it's very useful when you don't want to lose the end of your elastic and have to restart the process over again. So I'm just using that blue thread to hold it down whilst I will then sew, and then I will remove the blue thread. That's why I used a very different color thread. And then once you've done that, you actually have the top looking like a lovely 70s style off-shoulder top. Although I must say, I'm not making this to wear it off-shoulder. As I said, I shortened the front and the back elastic so that I'll be able to wear it with a bra, because if I was going to wear it off the shoulder, I would need to wear a strapless bra with it, but that's not my intention. So I'm going to finish off by doing the hem over there, and you could stop at this point, because at this point you actually have quite a nice looking top if that's how you want it. But for me, I wanted the poofy sleeves that actually come in and taper over the shoulder. So I'm going to have to thread through an elastic on the hem of the sleeve. So with the elastic, there's two choices, either safety pin or a bodkin. So I quite like using a bodkin because it can be quite useful. It's got that lovely gripper mechanism that you can use to make sure that the elastic stays on. But if you don't have that, there's no need to buy this one, you can still use a safety pin. It's still just as useful. What I do find that with the bodkin is because it is longer than a safety pin, it is a lot easier to hold on to as you are threading it through. But you have to be a bit more gentle with the bodkin, because I found that sometimes if it's a bit tight, like say you're going through a bit where there's a seam, the little metallic ring that causes the mouth of the bodkin to hold onto the elastic, that can slide away and cause it to lose the elastic, and then you have to pull it out and start all over again. Whereas with a safety pin, because you actually pin the elastic onto the safety pin itself, you don't have that issue. You can pull and tug as much as you want to because it is secure on that. So that's my only beefs with the bodkin. So as I said, it's not something that I think you'd absolutely have to buy. So one thing to do is just to make sure that your elastic doesn't have a twist in it. So before I sew it on, I just use my fingers to feel around, and if there's a twist, I will untwist it so that everything is nice and flat. And I used some hand sewing there in a different color because that's not going to be visible. Redistribute the gathers, and we have a lovely puff sleeve over there. So that is what it would look like, and I feel as though I am so happy with this because I quite like how it turned out. So as you can tell there, the back is higher than the front, but you may want to put a tag on there if you wanted to always be certain that you've got the right side, the right front when you put it on. I don't generally like tags on the back of my neck, so I always tend to cut them off whenever I buy things from charity shops. But I will always be able to tell with this one because the back is higher. And I think it looks lovely as a top, and you can wear it with a belt and it will be worn tucked in. So that's it. Thank you so much for joining me for this sewing project. Subscribe. I'll be back very soon to show you this with the styling options in another video. Take care until the next time I see you. Happy sewing. Bye.